Turn to the book of Proverbs, if you would. We've been in a series on communication. Talked about learning how to listen, making sure that you think before you speak. And then we talked about how to respond in a wise way. Well, this week we're going to talk about our emotional side of communication. Because if there's one roadblock that really ruins communication, and marriages and families, even churches sometimes, it's when there's too much heat and not enough heart. And so that's where we're at this morning. We've been looking at the ancient wisdom of the Proverbs and seeing how applicable it is to our lives today. It's just amazing how relevant these things are to us. So the first proverb this morning is from Proverbs 15:1. Proverbs 15:1, where it says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." And then Proverbs 17:27, where we read, "A man of knowledge uses words with restraint, and a man of understanding is even-tempered." Even-tempered. There was a couple celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary, and they were asked how they managed to get along all these years, and they had to admit that it hadn't always been easy. And the husband said, "Okay, it's true, we fight. But to be honest, we've never gone to bed mad. Of course, one year we were up for 3 months." Now, if social media is any indicator, we live in a world with a lot of angry contempt in our speech. Twitter has become 140 characters filled with naming, blaming, anger, and contempt. Angry, hurtful speech in a condensed form. We've managed to get the poison and the invective all together in just a few words. And it's sad. We see it all the time. We see emails where, because of anonymity, we feel like we can really express our opinion. And we don't hold back. With anger, with contempt, we blame, we insult, we name. Hateful, angry words, seething with contempt. We say the most monstrous things sometimes. Or have you ever read those reactions at the bottom of blog posts? How we call each other idiots and worse. It's amazing how in our social media world we see such angry, hateful communication on a regular basis. It has not brought out the best in us, has it? It's so easy to send off a text. It's so easy to send off, a little email and do it in anger without thinking how it might be received and how devastating it might be to another person. So it makes me wonder, if our social media reveals such angry, hateful communication, what do our homes look like? One counselor was talking, she quoted one of her clients, and she said, this client said this: "One thing 7 years of marriage has taught Bob and me is how to draw blood. We seem to know just how and where to hurt each other. And every time we try to talk, we end up hurling insults and causing pain. It's gotten so bad we just don't talk anymore." That's where the cycle of anger can take us, to that point where we just lose the ability to communicate completely. Anger. We all get angry, but we do it in different ways. We may call it being frustrated, or we might call it being upset. And we may not be the volcanic anger type. There's some of you who anger comes and it's like, it's everywhere. And you're over it pretty quickly. But there's others of us that deal with it in different ways. There was a student who came up to George Sweeting at Moody Bible and he said, "I lose my temper, but it's all over in a minute." And he answered, "And so is a hydrogen bomb, but think of the damage it produces." Well, you think about how that's true with words as well. So often we just spurt it out. It's everywhere. And then the damage control begins. Some of us are like a microwave where it's quick and it just heats up quickly. And others of us are more like the crock pot. It just kind of simmers there for a good long while, but eventually it's going to boil over. You can be sure of it. And you know, no matter how whatever our personality type is, we all have things that frustrate us. There are things that get under our skin. No matter how we react to it, there's always issues that have to be dealt with. There are conflicts that have to be resolved. Anger is something that's a part of our lives, and we better learn how to deal with it well, because it will keep us from communicating deeply and communicating well. So that's what our objective this morning is, to consider how do we communicate with more heart but less heat. There was an essay that I ran into some time ago that I hope you'll like it as much as I did, about how anger sometimes can make us almost unrecognizable to ourselves. And this was found in the New York Times back in the 90s somewhere. And this particular author, her name was Mary Gordon, wrote this, and I'm just going to read this for you. Listen carefully. It's a little bit of an extended illustration, but it's it really gets at anger. She writes, "Sin makes the sinner unrecognizable. I experienced this once myself, and I remember it because it frightened me. I became an animal. This sinful experience occurred, as many do, around the occasion of a dinner party. It was a hot August afternoon. I was having 10 people over for dinner that evening, and no one was giving me a bit of help. I was, of course, feeling like a victim, as everyone does in a hot kitchen on an August day. It's important to remember that the angry person's habit of self-justification is often connected to the habit of seeing him or herself as a victim. I'd been chopping, stirring, bending over a low flame, and all alone. The oven's heat was my purgatory, my crucible. My mother and my children thought this was a good time for civil disobedience. They positioned themselves in the car, and they refused to move until I took them swimming. Now, my children were at the tender ages at that time of 7 and 4, and my mother was 78, and except for her daily habit of verbal iron pumping, properly was described as infirm. They leaned on the horn, and they shouted my name out the window, well within the hearing of the neighbors, reminding me of my promise to take them to the pond. There are certain times when a popular cliche disgorges itself from the dulled sense of overuse and comes to life, and this was one of them. I lost it. I lost myself. I jumped on the hood of the car. I pounded on the windshield. I told my mother and my children that I was never ever going to take any of them anywhere, and none of them were ever going to have any friend back at my house until the hour of their death, which I said I hoped was very soon, and I couldn't stop pounding on the windshield. And then the frightening thing happened. I became a huge bird, a carrion crow. My legs became hard stalks. My eyes were sharp and vicious. I developed a murderous beak. Greasy black feathers took the place of my arms. I flapped and flapped. I blotted out the sun's light with my flapping. Each time my beak landed near the victims, it seemed to be my fists on the windshield, but it was really my beak on their necks. I went back for more. The taste of blood entranced me. I wanted to pack and pack and pack and pack forever. I wanted to carry them all off in my bloody beak and drop them on a rock where I could feed on their battered corpses till my bird stomach swelled. I didn't mean this figuratively. I became the bird. I had to be forced to get off the car and stop pounding my windshield. Even then, I didn't come back to myself. When I did, I was appalled. I realized I had genuinely frightened my children, mostly because they could no longer recognize me. My son said to me, I was scared because I didn't know who you were. I understand that this is not a sin of a serious nature, but I know that this to be true because it has its comic aspects, and deadly sin is characterized by the absence of humor, which always brings life. But because of that experience, and others I won't tell you about, I understand the deadly sin of anger. I was unrecognizable to myself, and for a time to my son. But I think I still would have been recognizable to most of the rest of the world, who would say, how can this person do this thing and still be human? Sometimes anger makes us unrecognizable to those who know us best, or to ourselves. It's amazing how a cycle of anger, when it is indulged, can lead us to places that we would never in our right mind go if we were really thinking about it and its consequences. It's devastating. It's deadly. Is that not why Jesus taught us to deal with our anger quickly, not to allow it to simmer and to grow and to lead us on a cycle that leads to violence and even the possibility of murder? That's what he taught us in the Sermon on the Mount. So the Proverbs here have a lot to teach us about anger. And it's an important part of our communication. So let's take a look at some very applicable texts. Proverbs 15:1, we already read it, but a gentle answer turns away wrath. A harsh word stirs up anger. I like the way Eugene Peterson puts it in the Message. He says, a gentle response diffuses anger, but a sharp tongue kindles a temper fire. Isn't that good? Saying something in a gentle, kind way is more likely to be effective and to communicate something than if you say a harsh, unkind thing. If you insult or you put a barb in there, little sarcasm. When we do it in a harsh way, an unkind way, it never seems to really communicate what it's meant to. In fact, what it does is it raises the temperature even higher, which takes away from the communication. Is this not the way it works? Have you not seen this in your own life? When I get hit with an insult, what do? I hit back, but I go for the blood. I mean, I'm going for more, I had a friend always who said, I don't get mad, I get even. Okay. Well, he got mad too sometimes. But another text that I like, fools reveal their anger right away, but the shrewd hide their contempt. Or the Message puts it, fools have short fuses and explode all too quickly. The prudent gently shrug off insults. One of the things that's repeatedly talked about in the Proverbs is that sometimes we are too quick to explode in anger. He talks about the short fuse, about being quick to anger. That's one of the issues that some of us deal with. And it's true. We sometimes have short fuses. 14:17 says, short-tempered people make stupid mistakes, and schemers are hated. Or, as the Message says, the hot-headed do things they'll later regret, and the cold-hearted get the cold shoulder. It's pretty good. Pretty good. When we're hot-headed, when we're angry, when we become like the bird banging out in the windshield, guess what? We regret that. And how many times do we say things in anger? And we are just caught up in the moment and we say something that, oh, did I say that? And we always regret it. We always are going to regret it. And then we have to clean up the damage. The damage control always goes with it. Wise are those who restrain their talking. People with understanding are cool-headed. Proverbs 17:27. So again, lessen the heat. Be more cool-headed, and your conversations will go better. Insightful people restrain their anger. Their glory is to ignore an offense. Their glory is to ignore it. There's a lot of things that are said, a lot of things that are hurled at us, that we would do just best just to let them fall to the ground and not worry about them. Sometimes we think we always have to respond. Something's got to be... Well, there's often times where we can just let that thing fall to the ground. It's okay. It's okay. Hotheads stir up conflict, but patient people calm down strife. Proverbs 15:8. Hot tempers start fights. A calm, cool spirit keeps the peace. Destructive people produce conflict, and gossips alienate close friends. Our tongue can destroy. It can be filled with life and healing and a source of nourishment and encouragement to people, or it can be something that destroys. And the start of a quarrel is like letting out water, so drop the dispute before it breaks out. You remember the Arnold Dam? It was starting to fall apart. The water was starting to come over. They had to evacuate. Well, how true it is. We need to deal with the issue before it becomes unmanageable. And so, just like the dam that's about to break, you better do something before it breaks, right? And so is anger. So anger is like that, among other things. So this cycle of anger, this is a little quote about it from Dallas Willard in The Divine Conspiracy, I think pretty insightful. He said, the sense of self-righteousness that comes with our anger, because that's often what motivates it, it's our self-righteousness, simply provokes more anger and self-righteousness on the other side. Oh, I'm the one in the right here. Of course, when nothing is done about things that are wrong, anger naturally builds and finally breaks into action, whether in a family or a nation. But the answer to right the wrong is persistent love, not to harbor anger, and thus to right it without adding further real or imaginary wrongs. To retain anger and to cultivate it is, by contrast, to give the devil a chance. Ephesians 4:26-27. And you can be sure he will take the chance that there will be hell to pay. The delicious morsel of self-righteousness that anger cultivated always contains comes at a high price in the self-righteous reaction of those we cherish anger toward. And the cycle is endless as long as anger has sway in our lives. Self-righteousness and pride are at the heart of what's going on in us when we feel the need to lash out. There can be, it's not always as simple as that. There's hurt. There's history. There's a lot of things that go into why we're feeling angry. But at its heart, we're feeling like we've been wronged and we're the righteous ones, and therefore we feel the obligation to lash out. He also says something I like. There is nothing that can be done with anger that cannot be done better without it. Now, I don't think a lot of people believe that. I think a lot of people believe that if they're going to get what they want, they're going to have an angry response. Ever been to an airport? Have you watched people when their plane or something goes wrong? I have seen angry tirades against the poor people at the counter. And I get it. I understand. I've been there too when the flight was canceled and I needed to get somewhere. I remember a particular night, it was a Christmas Eve, and I was trying to get home. And it was the last flight going to my destination, and it got canceled. And I wasn't real happy either. But there were some other people there that, oh my goodness, they just lashed at that poor person. And, or sometimes there's a mistake on the bill, so we call up customer service and I'm gonna really tell them what I think. As if that's gonna help. And sometimes there's an immediate response. But I can guarantee you this, if that's always your response, it will have long-term effects on the other's relationship, the relationship you have with the other people. It may have short-term effects, but it always devastates the relationship. It makes it harder for further communication to take place. So how do we deal with anger? Let's get practical. Number of things that are helpful in dealing with anger. One of them is this. It's like the proverb says, fools have short fuses and explode all too quickly. It's helpful to be able to identify when you're getting angry. To be able to understand how it functions in your body. When you're feeling upset and hurt, or whatever, frustrated. I'm frustrated. I'm not angry, I'm frustrated. Well, you're angry. Identify signs that you're getting angry. And there are a lot of these, so recognize how it works in you. But typical ones, clenching your hands, your jaw, tension in your shoulders, knots in your stomach, clammy hands, being flushed, breathing faster, pounding heart. Sometimes people get headaches. They pace back and forth. They need to walk around. I'm not really angry when I'm up here, by the way. Having trouble concentrating, racing thoughts. It's just like you can't get control of your thoughts. They're going around and around and around. Those are just a few of those things that you can sometimes experience in your life. The sooner you recognize what's going on in your life and your body, that's when you need to act. You need to start diffusing. You need to start cooling down, or things are going to erupt and they're going to get worse. Secondly, be aware of triggers. Proverbs says, the start of a quarrel is like letting out water, so drop the dispute before it breaks up. So in other words, know the things that are going to cause the conflict. Know the things that are going to bring out anger in yourself and in the person you're communicating with. And this is especially true for spouses, let's face it, or in family situations. So what I mean by this, here are some typical ones. There are more practical ones. I mean, if you always leave your socks on the floor, that could be a trigger, okay? There's some of us that are careless about little details like that, and we're always married to someone who cares about the little details, right? These are triggers. But there's others, like overgeneralizing. Couples do this a lot. Other people do too. You always do this. You always. No, you don't. You might do it 99.99% of the time, but you don't always do it. It's an exaggeration, right? Or you never do this for me. Always and never are pretty bad. I mean, they're not good words for a conversation. And they almost always strike up the heat. When you start accusing the other person, blaming the other person, or belittling the other person, or pointing out their faults, guess what happens? Temperature rises. Temperature rises, and you're sure to bring on more and more anger. The cycle gets out of control. Obsession with shoulds and musts can do this in some people. Having such a rigid view of the desired reality that you're just stubborn and bullheaded. And if you can't see it my way, then there's the highway. That can cause anger to rise in somebody who's a little more flexible about things, and you're married to each other usually. Mind reading. There's some people who can just read your mind. They know why you said that. I know why you said that. I know why you did that. I know what you were thinking. Oh, really? I know your motives. I know what you're trying to do here. Those kind of accusations, that kind of a thing, almost always raises the temperature. It always raises the temperature. You don't know for sure. You may have a pretty good idea, but it doesn't help to say that you know. Better to ask a leading question, or to walk away for a bit and come back to it. Collecting straws. These people that are always looking for the last straw, the one that breaks the camel's back. They've been collecting these things for a while, and they're just waiting to let go. Not forgiving. Not putting things behind you, but piling up offenses until we hit the last straw. Accusing. Blaming. Or the other side of that, when you don't take responsibility. all things can trigger anger in the other person. Or if the other person does it to you, it could easily trigger it in you. Now, there's lots of other things you can add to your list. I bet if I were to pass around paper today, you could give me hundreds of things that could cause you to get angry with another individual. But these are some typical ones that I've seen in relationships I'm familiar with and people that I've counseled. So be aware of those things that cause problems. This gives you a good indicator. I need to do something about this before it gets further along. Cool down. Hot heads stir up conflict, but patient people calm down strife. Cool down. Take a good deep breath. Take a few. It's a simple thing, but it actually does tend to calm tension. Count to 10. I think as Thomas and Jefferson said, if you're angry, count to 10. And if you're really angry, count to 100. That's not too bad of advice. Well, there's a lot of people it's said of. It's like all those little quotes. Every quote book gives a different person, the famous person who said it. So who knows who really said it. But it's still pretty good advice. Exercise. Take a walk. Do some physical exercise to release the tension. I know people, when they get upset, like to go chop wood. There's something about swinging that axe that it just helps get the tension out and calms them right down. Back on the farm, it was scooping corn in the bin. There's something about that exercise. But there is something to be said. Or just taking a little walk. Go around the block and walk. Cool down a little bit. Stretch. Massage away the tension. Roll your shoulders. Massage your neck. These are just simple little things you can do to cool down. Do something relaxing. Listening to music might help. Taking a walk in the woods. Sitting by the lake or by a river can calm the tense spirit and just refresh you and bring you back to a point where, okay, now we can talk. Now I'm calmed down. I'm ready to be able to discuss the real issue. So, next step I think is to this is kind of the same thing. Discuss with a cool head. The greatest cure for anger is delay, said Seneca. I don't know if that's true, but there's some truth to it. So instead of fighting when the tensions are high, remove yourself from the situation and cool down first. A brisk walk, some exercise, listen to music, something that will help you regain your composure. Discuss the underlying issues after you've cooled down. Almost nothing is gained by continuing to argue when you're angry, when the tension is raised too high. You're not listening to each other. You're not really communicating. You're hurting each other because you're speaking words from a hurtful place, and you're not really communicating. So discuss things with a cool head. You're not going to gain anything. You think, oh, I've got an advantage with my anger. Oh, you don't. And take a reality check. Wise are those who restrain their talking. People with understanding are cool-headed. Remember we talked about think before you speak? Well, think before you get angry, too. Think, what will this accomplish? What will this volcanic reaction, or whatever it is, in you, how is that going to affect things in the grand scheme of things? Is this really worth getting this angry about? Is this worth ruining the rest of my day? Is this response appropriate to the situation? Is there anything I can do about this that will actually help? What effects will my anger have on this relationship, our family, this situation? It helps to pause and to think. How is this going to impact the situation? Because in the moment where our temperature has arisen, we're not thinking very well. In fact, C.S. Lewis said that anger is the anesthetic of the mind. It's pretty good. It's the anesthetic of the mind. It's like it shuts it right down. We're not thinking at that point. We're reacting. Then look to the real problem. Often fights develop over little insignificant things that trigger our anger. but they aren't the real problem. Sometimes you've had a horrible day, and there's all kinds of things that have led up to this moment, and you lash out in anger, but it really wasn't about what just happened. It was what happened before. And now you're taking it out on somebody else, especially your spouse, because he's close. And besides, you got some other straws, so it's pretty easy. What is really beneath the angry feelings? What is the real problem? Trying to figure that out, sensing the underlying need. I'll give you, and then as you discuss, fight fair. I'm not saying you should really fight, but if you're going to talk, fight fair, talk fairly. There's a couple things I would suggest to you. A healthy relationship is your priority, not winning the argument. Too often we come into a situation where we feel hurt. And what do? We're going for the win. I want to win the argument. No, your relationship needs to win. That's more important than you winning the argument. There's a lot of times it'd be better to lose the argument for the sake of your relationship. We talked a couple weeks ago, active empathetic listening. Learn to listen to each other, to understand before you need to be understood. Go back and listen to that one if you missed it. Focus on the present, the issue at hand. Avoid bringing up the past, assigning blame. Focus on solving the problem now. What is the real issue now? Because we get sidetracked on a million other issues and we don't ever get to the problem. And that keeps us from resolving it. I learned a long time ago about I statements. Whenever you start saying you, it almost always deteriorates. You always do this. You do that. You're wrong. They tend to be blaming and accusing and focusing. Here's what I think. I think this. I feel this. Here's what I see. I feel, I think. Avoid accusing, blaming, and generalizing. They never get you anywhere. Insightful people restrain their anger. Their glory is to ignore an offense. Proverbs 18:11. Choose your battles. Know whether the issue is worth fighting for. Is this worth my time and attention, or is this just silly? Choose your battles. Be aware and avoid triggers. We talked about that. Civility. Avoid name calling, belittling, sometimes profanity. These things evidence deep anger and contempt. They don't belong in our lives. Forgive freely and know when to let something go. Know when to let something go. Now, it's pulling this all together. These are general principles that for all of us. There are going to be some of you in any congregation this size, there's going to be some of you who might need some extra help. I get that. I understand that. There can be things that cause anger issues. There can be disorders that require medication and that require professional help. And if that's the case, then it's good for you to help find that. And I recognize that. If you have anger management problems in a marriage or in a family or something, you need to be setting clear boundaries for yourself of what you will and won't tolerate. There's no place for abuse, no place for abusive words of any kind, and there's no place for violence in a family or in a marriage. And if that's happening, then you need help. You need help. Wait for a time when you're both calm to talk about the anger issue. 3, remove yourself from the situation that doesn't calm down. Stay safe and keep your family safe. Get help if you need it. And then if you're doing social media, don't click send when you're upset or angry. Sleep on it. Cool down. Start over from a calmer place. Don't write or respond out of anger or contempt. Be civil and courteous, even if the other person isn't civil or courteous. Wisdom is often found in letting go of an offense without need to defend or respond. Now, dealing with anger in the long term, let me just say, at its heart, there are character issues and growth that go on in our lives that help us to grow in this area. And in large part, Thomas à Kempis, classic quote, "Be not angry that you cannot make others as you wish them to be, since you cannot make yourself as you wish to be." There's a place for grace here. We sang Amazing Grace a while ago. Some of us struggle more in this area than others, and we need to show grace toward each other. But at its heart, the issues that cause deep anger usually are areas of hurt and woundedness in our heart that haven't been resolved. And sometimes when there's deep anger, you need to find healing for the wounds. Now, Jesus provides them, and we can find deep healing for things that have wounded us. And part of it's spiritual formation. It's growing more and more into the likeness of Christ. Little bit by little bit, becoming more patient and kind and gentle, caring and concerned, of communicating clearly and honestly and openly. And spiritual formation is all about simple things learned deeply. It's about spending time in prayer, practicing His presence. It's about taking time for silence and solitude and retreat sometimes. And just developing your relationship with the Lord and allowing Jesus to live out His life through you. Henry Drummond said, "It's not enough to deal with the temper. We must go to the source and change the inmost nature. Souls are made sweet not by taking the acid fluids out, but by putting something in. A great love, a new spirit, the Spirit of Christ. This only can eradicate what's wrong, work a chemical change, renovate the inner man." I think it is true that the more God pours His agape love into our hearts and changes us from the inside out, the more He deals with those hurts and those wounds, and the more the character and patience of Jesus becomes ours. But it takes time, and it takes time in His presence. Simple things learned deeply that push us forward in the direction that He wants us to go. Just as I told you, phileo love or philos love helps a marriage, so does agape. When our hearts are filled with agape love, the will to do good for the other, that self-sacrificial love that was like Jesus' love, oh, how much that helps us deal with these angry emotions and enables us to communicate more clearly. When I really love you, I'm going to be patient with you. I'm going to listen. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to respond to you in a Christ-like way. We so need His agape love. See, we want more heart and less heat. And that takes attention on our part to what's going on within us. Paul said to get rid of anger. Get rid of it. And so we must deal with it. And the quicker we do it, the easier it is to do. The longer we let it fester and grow, the more difficult. It becomes like a fire. You start it out, pretty easy to extinguish it, but the longer it goes, the more difficult it is. And so is anger. Well, let's pray. Lord, I think we've all probably had times where we responded in ways that we later regretted. Forgive us for that. Help us, Lord, to be people who experience more and more of your love, and who are able to take our hurts and our concerns to you, to your cross, that we can find the healing that we need to those wounded places. Help us, Lord, to grow ever more into the likeness of Christ, that we respond to each other, not in anger or contempt or hate, but with a deep love, a love that looks for the good of the other, that sacrifices, that follows the example of Jesus Himself. continue to teach us. Give us the amazing grace that forgives and teaches us to say no to sin and live in a way that brings you glory. We pray in Jesus' name.